Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And thank you for attending our second Citizens Academy. We had a great session last time, and tonight's going to be even more exciting. We're dealing with dollars and cents, something that we all find so dear to our heart. And we'll find out that we're doing well as a city. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, our special meeting, and we'll take procedural, we'll just take a roll. And Councilmember Chavez is here. Mayor Pro Tem Sternquist is here. I'm here, so we have a quorum. And we'll excuse Councilmember Parr and Councilmember Viscara-Focas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director, Administrative Services Director, Tracy Howe, for some very, very interesting City Finances 101 tonight. So, and you're going to take it over. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, and Jerry's going to monitor my tone or the loudness of my voice if it's too loud or not too loud enough. So I'll be watching him. Thank you, Mayor Yu, and as he indicated, I'm Tracy Haas. I'm the Administrative Services Director for the City of Temple City. And I've been with the city now about 3 months, so I am relatively new to this organization, but I have to say it's a real pleasure to be here, and I certainly enjoy serving the city and serving the citizens of the city of Temple City. I've worked in local government finance for about 30 years and various cities around the San Gabriel Valley. And I've lived in the county area of San Gabriel, about 2.5 miles from here, for about 16 years. So I'm very familiar with the city and the community, and I'm really pleased to be here and serve. Okay, I have a PowerPoint slide presentation tonight. You have a copy. We have a couple other documents that we'll talk about as we get into this. My thought is I'll start the presentation, but if you'd like to stop and ask questions, feel free. I think that's great. I think it's a better approach to be a little bit more interactive and keep everybody awake. So feel free to ask any questions and stop me at any time. Tonight we're going to do City Finances 101 and Making Sense. As you know, we have set up 7 sessions for the Citizen Academy, and this is the second session tonight on city finances. Okay, this is the icebreaker for tonight. So, take a coin from your wallet or your pocket, pull out a coin, and look at the date. If anybody needs coins to borrow, let me know.
I need a coin. I have a coin.
How about you?
Make sure I get it back. And I'm a buffalo.
Thanks. Okay, everybody have a coin and they're looking at the date. They can't put their glasses on to see it. I know I would. And what is the date on your coin? And tell us what was impacted in that particular, what was financially impacted in that particular year that's on the date of your coin. So let's throw some dates out and see if we can.
I have 1974.
1974.
And I think I was in Augsburg, Germany then.
Wow. Do you remember anything about the financial condition?
I was a kid in
Where's the
school.
date?
I had no worries.
Oh, okay.
I had to babysit to raise funds to buy my first pair, my own jeans.
Okay.
We met in
All right.
1975.
And what's another date? 2002. 2002. That was right after 9/11.
Where'd you see it?
Good.
South Brooklyn.
So yes, there were some challenges with the economy then, primarily I would say because of 9/11. Really, we weren't in a recession like we are now, but it was starting to sort of fall and then came back up in mid 2000, and obviously things have changed a little bit in the last couple of years. How about another date?
2001.
Well, 9/11.
2005.
2007, probably the beginning of the bubble was about ready to pop. What about, does anybody have a coin that says I think it was 1978. That was the year that Proposition 13 was passed. Is anybody familiar with Proposition 13?
Yes.
And it really, I remember I was in college, and that proposition really changed sort of the landscape of local government finances. And at the time, it seemed like a great idea. And I think, you know, for obviously the homeowners and property owners, it is a good idea because it did certainly put a ceiling on property taxes. However, I think Prop 13 is one of the reasons that we're experiencing sort of the challenges that we're experiencing now, especially on the state level and the county level, because it sort of artificially has held down property tax revenues so that doesn't match the rising costs and requirements of resources in local governments. So I think that's definitely significant. And there's been talk about legislatively about possibly changing that, but something to come in the future. Anything else? The last one I can go ahead.
I've heard a rumor that they're going to remove Prop 13 from maybe commercial properties. Is that a possibility?
I haven't heard that, but it's my understanding that in order for anything about Prop 13 to change, it would have to be a majority vote of the people. So they'd have to put it on the ballot.
I see.
So since it was voted in, you know, by referendum, it would have anything to change. Have to.
I always have this question about when lottery, we had debated so much of bringing lottery to California.
Yes.
And that time they promised they will give money to schools.
Yes.
So what is it? I never seen anything.
I know. And I really can't.
That was after 78.
Yes, and I really can't speak to that real technically because that's all on the state level. But I think that was the intent when it was certainly started or brought in. But again, I think there's just so many demands on resources on the state level that there's just not enough resources, no matter where it comes from. So, the last date that comes to mind in my career that was sort of sticks in my head is 1994, and that's when Orange County. Remember when the county treasurer was leveraging the portfolio and basically almost bankrupted Orange County. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the investments and how we handle our investments. So that obviously was big in my career. So anything else before we go on? Yes.
Just the state lottery usually contributes less than 2% to schools.
You need to look at that legislation, don't we? Yeah, the schools are really suffering, that's for sure. Okay. But Temple City is not. We're in good shape. So tonight's session, we're going to basically cover 3 major areas. How City Hall operations are funded. How is the city able to make ends meet, live within our means? What checks and balances do we have? How is the city transparent with its finances? And then we'll end it with some discussion on long-term financial planning. Okay, how are city operations funded? It's basically 2 different types of revenue. The first one is the general fund. And the general fund represents the most flexible funds of primary financial resources of which the city can choose how to spend those funds. We'll get into more detail in a few minutes, but it's basically general taxes, property tax, sales tax, and then the general fund can typically will be the primary resource for day-to-day operations and administrations. And these are funds that are not mandated to be spent in a certain way. Obviously, they have to go for general city services, but there's also special revenue funds that are restricted and have to be spent on specific purposes. And again, I'll get into more detail on that in a few minutes. Okay, this is our general fund, and these are the revenues that come into the general fund. So our total general fund revenue estimates this year is approximately $11.3 million. And out of that $11.3 million, approximately 20% comes from property taxes, and 12% sales tax, 10% is other taxes. And other taxes is franchise fee, and a franchise fee is what the city is allowed to enter into an agreement with the utilities for basically a use fee. Like Edison is in here in our city, and Southern California Gas, and they're basically using our infrastructure to deliver their services. And so we are, as a city, are allowed to negotiate what we call a franchise fee, which brings in resources to us to maintain the streets and light poles and stuff that Edison and Southern California Gas are in here using our resources. Other tax is transient occupancy tax, or the bed tax. That's what we charge at the local hotels for when guests come to stay. Intergovernmental is also really our biggest revenue source, and that is primarily a resource called motor vehicle in lieu tax. And what that is it's your license fee, the license fee that you pay on your car. The city gets most of that back. And the history behind that is that the car tax, or the tag tax, is a local tax. And I believe it was about in the 1930s, the state said, well, you guys are collecting all this tax for your vehicles, but we also want to do some regulatory things through that process, so we'll collect it for you and then we'll remit it back to you. So for all these years, 70, 80 years, that's what the state has done, and this puts it all back into the local government. As you recall, a few years ago, the state tried to take that tax away. I mean, there's been the motor vehicle has been an issue for a couple of years. You remember when not Jerry Brown, the governor before Davis, yes. Remember how he increased it, and Scorsese came in and decreased it, and all that time that was happening. Local governments were unsure how we were going to land with receiving that tax. And it was major. As you can see, for us, it's like 30% of our general fund. So that's one example of how the state in the past years has created a lot of uncertainty. But now, I think that the battle has been fought long enough, and it really, the state really doesn't have the authority to take it away because it's a local tax. They just collect it for us. Fees, fines, and charges are also a major portion, and these are planning and zoning fees, building permits, recreation fees, and court fines. When you get a ticket, you get a movie violation, small piece, and that comes back to us. Our interest income, our investments, is unfortunately only about 4% right now. I'll go into a little bit more on investments in a few minutes, but everybody knows the market. We're not making a lot of interest, and then other taxes is very small. It's typically reimbursements and that kind of thing. Okay, I think this slide is significant, and that we have charted basically our general fund revenues over the last approximately 10 years. So if I can do this slide. And you can see that about in 2007 and 2008 and 9, we certainly saw a drop in our general fund revenues. And I'm going to talk about how the city in the future will address that if it happens again in a few minutes. It's dealing with our reserve policy. Fortunately, over the last couple of years, 2011 and 2012, we see that line going back up again. So that's positive. Yes,
Between 2004 and 2008, where it goes up, is
Yes.
that because of the property values were going up mainly?
property values primarily, probably some sales tax too, because we were in recession then. Okay, this is total assessed valuation in the city of Temple City. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this to provide an understanding of when you write that check to the county every year for your property taxes, how much of that comes back here to the city of Temple City. So we have our assessed valuation in Temple City is $3.4 billion, or was in 2011, and has increased to $3.6 billion from last year to this year, which is a really positive sign. I think we are, we're unusual in that many cities around us are seeing that valuation drop. And there's some reasons for that. And for example, like out in the Inland Empire and some other areas, it's unfortunate. But one of the reasons why ours is dropping is we're a very built-out city, and the housing stock, is typically people have been in their homes for a long time, and then as they turn over, as they are they're sold, the values are significantly increased. So it's a positive for us.
We ranked number 3 out of the 88 cities in increased assessed valuation last year.
Thank you, Jerry. I did not have that fact.
Yes.
Certainly.
Only Walnut and San Marino are ahead of us.
Thank you. Excellent. And that's perfect, because that just shows the other cities, so many of the other cities in Los Angeles County just are not seeing that growth in assessed valuation that we are. Okay, this is how the property tax dollar is broken up. And it's a little bit difficult to see, so if you want to pull it on your, pull it up in your packet, that might be easier to read. I'm going to give you a couple of figures here. So out of every dollar that you pay in property tax, and this is your actual tax bill, not your assessed valuation, but your tax amount, the city only receives about 7 cents of that. So we really receive a small portion of the property tax bill. And the other areas that it goes to is, in the breakdown, about 24 cents of that goes to Los Angeles County, and 18%, help me, I think with my glasses, 18% goes to the school district, and various other taxing districts within the county. So we really don't see a whole lot of property tax. But for last fiscal year, 2010-11, the city did receive approximately $2 million in property tax. So if your property tax bill is $5,000 annually, so that would mean your assessed valuation of your house maybe around $500,000. These are just kind of general figures. So if your property tax bill is $5,000 annually, the city only receives about $333 out of that chunk. I think this is important to show why that really, we need other resources besides property tax and sales tax, because we really don't get that much. It sounds like every year you write a check and it's a lot of money, but unfortunately the local, the return isn't that high. Just a couple other things. Our increase, going to go back for a second, our increase in of our assessed value evaluation from 2011 to 2012 was about $200 million, which in revenues to us, it's about $133,000. So that would just kind of hopefully put into perspective what that means. Any other questions on, yes?
I think that .0666 number is only more on cities such as ours, but I think some other cities get a bigger portion of the property tax.
They do.
Yes.
That's correct. I've seen cities get anywhere from 10 to 12 cents on the dollar. And how that is determined was back when Proposition 13 was passed, because that was when the whole, game changed with how property taxes were distributed. So, and at the time, there was some sort of calculation that you had to report in to the county, and then they basically used a formula, and Temple City's is almost 7 cents, and that is on the low side. So
Very low.
I don't know exactly what happened at the time, but unfortunately, that's what it is. We're going to talk about sales tax. Again, another major revenue source for us. LA County sales tax is 8.75, and out of that 8.75%, the city receives 1%. So in other words, 1/9, basically 1/9 of the tax that's paid. It's not 1% of the 8.75%, it's 1% of the 8.75. So 1% comes to us, 7.75 goes to other taxing agencies. 6% to the state, and the remaining is in other county referendums, which I'll actually talk about a little bit later. I've provided for you the top sales tax producers here in Temple City, and not in any order, because actually sales tax information is confidential by sales tax producer, because then that can reveal, obviously, what their gross sales is. So that is confidential information. But I just wanted to give you an idea of our sales tax producers, top sales tax producers in Temple City. Last fiscal year, 2010-11, the city received $1.6 million in sales tax.
Just want to make a comment from this item.
Okay.
A lot of people, we've seen a lot of restaurants moving into our city, and actually, as you can see, restaurants do produce, they're one of our higher sales tax producers. Of this 25 businesses in here, 7 of them are restaurants. And if you add grocery stores in there, so a good portions are food-related businesses.
Yes.
I understand that Almonte City, their sales tax is higher than ours.
Right. Can you guess why? Longo Toyota. Sales tax.
They generate sales.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't
The
understand.
sales rate,
The sales rate
the
is
sales tax
lower?
rate,
Yeah.
yeah. They're 9.25.
Oh, they have a 1% following surcharge.
The city council can vote, can determine that can cap or increase the local sales tax.
So they brought 9.7.
9.25.
Yeah.
So we have no.
Yeah, about.
We have no lower sales tax.
Yeah, you can see that online.
Okay, I'd be glad to take a look at it. I thought you meant they generate a lot of sales tax, and the reason they do is because they have Longo Toyota, which I'll get into that later too,
Okay.
of how, how certain type of businesses can be really favorable or can really affect you negatively if you rely on those sales tax dollars.
Question.
Uh-huh.
Looks like we're getting sales about 20 million a year. That's kind of low, isn't it? For the city?
Actually, it would be, I have it.
That's the 1% of what we get.
It would be about 161 million. So if we at 1.6 million,
161 million.
161 million
Right.
is the total sales citywide.
That's better than.
Yeah, what did you say,
That's pretty
16
high.
million? Yeah, put another 0.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, how are our general funds used? It pays for basic operations, and it's split up by the departments and the percentages. And I'm just going to give you a little bit more of a detailed explanation of what each of these departments do. If you want to make some notes. Management services, which is 14%, is our city administration, legal services, economic development, and special projects, and the city clerk's office. So those functions are under management services. Administrative services is finance, personnel, information technology, purchasing, and risk management. Falls in the area of under my responsibility. Community development, which is 15%. Planning, building and safety, housing, and community preservation. Community preservation is code enforcement activity. Public safety is our sheriff's services contract and emergency preparedness, which is a big chunk. So it's basically a third of our spending, which is not unusual at all. In fact, cities with their own public safety, their own in-house police and fire, that number is much bigger. Public safety is really a primary cost.
That's both fire and police?
Just police, because we are covered under county fire, and you basically pay for that service under property taxes.
Well, not all actually, because I looked into it, Zero Madre actually spent about 3.6 million according to our name, their own department.
And they spend 3.6 million? But what's the percentage of that to their whole entire general fund budget?
And just to put it in perspective, I was a Toledo city manager, and previously I worked for Montebello and also for San Fernando. San Fernando in 2009, the city, 26,000, 2.4 square miles. We had a police force of 36 employees. In 2009, the budget, out of the $16 million budget, general fund budget, $9.2 million was going to public safety. That's only the police. Okay. On top of it, you have another $3 million contract with the city of Los Angeles for the fire service. So it's about a third of the cost by not having your own police department. You don't have all the additional overhead. So just kind of give you a reference point. It's a third of the cost.
I would like to look at, we can maybe talk about that later, or we can talk, because Sierra Madre,
I think more comparable.
right, I don't know where I'm at with their general fund budget, because I don't think it's as large as here, but I'll take a look at that.
I'll look it up.
Okay, maintenance services, 10%. Facility maintenance, street sweeping, and traffic signals. Community services, our famous Parks and Recreation Department, park maintenance, recreation program, senior services, and public transit. So that is basically how we spend our general fund dollars. Any other questions? Yes?
I just looked it up.
Oh, you did, thank you.
53% of the general funds.
How much?
53%.
53% of their general funds goes to public safety in Sierra Madre.
Is that too far?
I don't know. Just police.
Just police, right?
And just for a reference point, again, the danger zone for cities, when your public safety starts to consume your general fund budget is 50%. If you're beyond 50%, then you're headed down a slippery slope in terms of, your public safety expenses, because the public safety expenses never, ever go down. And they always continue to increase, so that's an important thing to keep in mind as you go through the budget process.
Do the percentages include the contracts? Because each of the services, there's only 34 employees, and then contract services for like maintenance
Correct.
and public service and the rest of them, all have contracts.
Right, like community development, we contract out a lot of the services with the county, but yes, it includes all the contracts. Yeah, total cost of running of the general fund, providing basic services that, you see on a daily basis. Streets, maintain, sheriff's cars, police, or fire, traffic signals. Okay. We're going to leave the general fund now. We're going to talk about the special funds. Most of the special funds that we have here in Temple City are transportation related, which is really positive because that is one way that we can keep our streets maintained, provide enhancements, for example, the Rosemead Boulevard Enhancement Project. A couple examples of special revenue funds is a fund called gas tax. And if you didn't know it, every time you go fill up your car with gasoline, there's taxes on that, and you do get a portion of that tax back. And we can spend that money on anything, street reconstruction, street maintenance. That entails traffic signals, some sidewalk maintenance, I believe, that's dealing with, with reconstruction of a street. So this is a great source of revenues for maintaining your streets. And we get about $500,000 or $600,000 a year of gas taxes.
And make a note on this one, we would really encourage everybody to basically fill up in Temple City. Because not only do we get the sales tax, but we also get the money, some of that money back to actually fix the streets. So if you're filling outside of Temple City, you're actually helping fix the streets of other cities.
My favorite.
So keep that in mind and tell
We
that to
have
your
the best
family members
streets.
as well. That's something that people don't realize.
My favorite gas station is Chevron right there.
So if you're helping other your adjacent cities, I'm sure they appreciate
We
it.
do have the best streets.
5% cheaper than the
But we want them to do better.
But there's only two in Temple City, now Rosemary Boulevard, is that correct, or is there another one?
Is there only two gas stations in Temple City? I don't know.
No.
That's more than that. More than that. Look at the top producers here. Sorry, two gas stations.
So the Unical at corner of the Wardy,
No, that's not in Temple City.
that's where I get gas. No,
Well, you gotta
Wardy.
pull up, there's one on Oak and
Temple City
Las
gas.
Tunas.
Okay.
There's another 76.
Oh, they're
Chevron.
Chevron, Temple City Gas, so there are at least three.
I think they're up there on the list.
Yeah, it's on the list.
So help us keep your streets.
Yeah,
But
that is important. Yes.
Does the city give them bonus to open in the city?
No.
Tell them to give us better gas prices and we'll fill it in the city.
but some of the other special funding is depending on the population.
Yes, yes.
Cabinet. That's
Right.
why some of the apparently lesser income cities should have a relatively large
Right.
funds because they have more people than we.
Right. In fact, I'm going to talk about that now. That's a good point. Some other funds, Proposition A, believe it or not, if you don't recall this, I'll remind you, in 1982, the voters in Los Angeles County passed Prop A, which increased the county sales tax by 0.5%, and for public transportation purposes. And so 25% of these funds then are allocated, 75% are the county, 25% are allocated to the cities based on population. And we use these funds primarily for mass transit. I mean, they have to be used for mass transit. So it supports the Dial-A-Ride program, it supports the bus pass program, and like you can do maintenance or build bus shelters, anything that is related to mass transit. So sometimes these funds can be a little bit limiting, but again, it's very common for cities to use these funds for the Dial-A-Ride programs. Prop C was another proposition that was passed in 1990 and added another 0.5 cents of sales tax for public transportation projects. 20% of these funds are allocated to municipalities based on population. And these funds are more like gas tax. They're unlike Prop A, that you don't have to use them for mass transit. They're more like gas tax, and you can use them for street maintenance. And pretty broad, it's just like supplemental to gas tax. It's a different source of taxing. No, because your gas tax comes from the tax you pay on gasoline. Prop C comes from 0.5 cent sales tax. They're both taxes, but it's a tax in a different thing. But they can fund the census, correct. I think that during that time, yes.
When is this tax money allocated to the city?
We get it on a monthly basis. So the allocations are determined, annually based on estimates, and then, we get monthly payments on that.
Or the state have borrowed gas tax.
Yes, they have. but they're pretty much staying, well, I say they're staying out of our pockets, but that's not true with redevelopment, but they're sort of staying away from our general taxes now. I think they've really kind of pushed the envelope as far as they can. So, and then there was another measure in 2008, I don't have it up here, it's Measure R, approved by the voters. To remember all these things you might have voted for. And that also put a 1/2 sales tax for public transportation. That includes for street maintenance and reconstruction. And it's 15% of these funds are allocated back to municipalities based on per capita. So that is, I'm hitting sort of the big special revenue funds here.
Are some of these funds, some of these ones like that last one you mentioned, are those ones where they complain that some of the money hasn't been allocated where it was originally intended?
I haven't heard anything on Measure R.
They have, okay. On R, it's okay?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. We also have different, and I'm going to hit on your question now about grants. This city's done an amazing job, especially over the last year or so, leveraging money to receive federal and state grant funding for transportation. And again, we are really focusing a lot of our transportation funds to the Rosemead Boulevard expansion. He asked me to talk a little bit about grants. You basically write a grant. You justify why you want the funds, and it's always typically it's some sort of matching grant. In other words, you have to put up some resources to get, to get these grants. And you submit your grant, and then, whatever agency you submit it to, federal or state, will evaluate it, and then notify you if you are successful. And again, Temple City in the last year has been really successful in that. They're reimbursement grants, so we basically have to spend money first, and then request reimbursement, and that usually is like a 2 to 3 month time frame. And when we talk about our reserve policy in a little while, that kind of all ties into that also. There's just some minor grants. For example, we have a fund for used oil recycling block grant. I mean, we get sort of minor amounts that come in on these different programs to fund programs like used oil and traffic safety and that type of thing. So we even got some R money. Remember when Obama put out the American, I don't remember what it stands for. Really, yeah, yes, to sort of kickstart the economy, create jobs. City of Temple City even received some of those funds.
How successful are you on reimbursement grants if the money's already been spent by the city?
Oh, you're going to get your money. I mean, if the project was approved and if you have spent the funds in accordance with the grant, you will get reimbursed.
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought you were asking for the grant money after everything was done, and you
get it first. Get approvals first.
Yeah, typically what'll happen is, you spend the money, and either on a monthly or a quarterly basis, depending on the grant. After you've spent the money, then there's a grant reimbursement submission form, and you fill all that out. And if you've spent the money in accordance with the grant, reimbursement usually comes within, it's usually a 2 or 3 month turnaround. And agencies will come in and audit you to ensure, you put it on paper, and then most of the time they'll come in and do an audit. And on the Prop A and Prop C funds, we have county auditors in here every year to audit just Prop A and Prop C to ensure that we're spending it in accordance with regulations.
On the grant money, what happens if the grant money dries up?
You mean like...
If they award a grant to us, does that mean they automatically put the money in a checking account so that or is it based upon that funds are available?
That's a really good question. I've never had, go ahead, let's say.
I think I explained. It depends on what the funding source is. When you get an appropriation from an entity, like in this case, We, I think, received $2.25 million from the Metro, a couple projects, and from the Rose Boulevard project. Those funds are earmarked already, so the Board of Supervisors actually earmarked those funds through a public process, and it's in the budget. So as long as you use those funds within the 3 or 6 year period, whatever you get into using the funds, you're okay. If you go beyond that period and you haven't started your project, then yes, you do get in trouble. But for the most part, as Tracy said, if you do what you're supposed to be doing, submitting reimbursables, you're good. You just have to have a team internally of staff members that know how the process works. Because if you don't know, then you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know when to submit reimbursables, and you can get basically upside down financially if you all of a sudden you use all your money from your general fund to cover grants. So yeah, it's kind of a balancing act. You have to make sure that you're submitting those reimbursables immediately, you know, and that when the auditors come in, then you know that everything's done by the books, and you can basically submit their grants. And just by the way, we just got a clean bill of health from our auditors as well. So I think that's an important notation that really helps when we do grant applications.
So when you're looking at the grant initially, then you're determining whether or not it's worth funding.
Correct.
Right.
We usually
Application.
we're more picky about the grants that we go after, because it takes the same amount of effort and cost to go after a $50,000 grant than it does to do $1 million grant. So we strategically go after the bigger ones because we're limited in size, and but we're trying to get the most bang for the buck as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you keep track of when those grants are available?
20 years of experience in Tennessee. And you know, you just have to know where the resources are. You have to know the state, federal, county cycles of when things are available. And also, you have to know when to ask your Congress people for funding, when to ask the assembly members and senators for funding. So it's a big task, but I think with the council's help, we really have made a big effort in going out there and meeting earmarks, you know, for different funding sources.
We do use funding consultants to help us.
And sometimes write grants. Yes.
Write and chase them.
Yeah, because grant writing and the process for getting grants is pretty technical. So, you know, you have to.
So like for the Rose being an example, the real issue will be cash flow then? Managing cash flow for the project?
I'm going to talk about that in a couple minutes.
Okay.
But actually, I don't anticipate it being a cash flow issue, and I'll tell you why. Okay, our second set of topics. How is the city able to balance its budget? What checks and balances exist, and how is the city transparent about its finances? I think the primary reason is that the city has excelled in really good financial planning. To give you a couple of reasons for that. One we touched on before. We do not have in-house public safety. We have contract with public safety. As Jose indicated a few minutes ago, your costs really escalate if you have in-house public safety. I think that's a primary reason why Temple City has been able to, you know, effectively keep operations costs down and be able to live within their means. And also, as we discussed a few minutes ago, contracting out for other services for the county, planning, street maintenance. You know, you don't have to pay for that overhead in-house. Temple City has also been really prudent with its reserves. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail in that in a few minutes because that's going to address your cash flow issue. And the council recently adopted an ordinance actually setting in cement a reserve policy. So those reserves will remain unless the council decides to take further action and adopt another ordinance to change those reserve levels. And it was really important to the council that that an ordinance be adopted because, you know, it's a process for an ordinance to take effect. It has to have a first and second reading, and then it has a 30-day period before it actually is or takes effect. So, you know, it's really important to this council that a lot of thought go into, you know, if reserves were going to be changed. And I think that's, you know, excellent planning.
I think it's important to also note that this council is protecting the future of Temple City because, God forbid, you never know what kind of council is going to get in there, and they can decide, 3 of them, that we want to spend $10 million of our reserves on this pet project. And they're ensuring that that couldn't happen.
Right, exactly.
It's what, 4/5?
Maybe 4/5, yeah.
Also, we're happy to say that this operating budget that we're proposing, this general fund operating budget that we're proposing this year, actually has a surplus of about $14,000. Not huge, but not a deficit. And what this means is our ongoing revenues are actually more than our ongoing operations, which is, you know, it's just like your personal finances. It's your living within your means. And, you know, a lot of cities around us are having much more difficulty being able to do a balanced budget. In fact, obviously, the city of Glendale's budget is much bigger than ours. I think their general fund is about $100 million, and they're looking at a $15 million deficit. And so that's major in services. So, again, I think that's prudent financial planning. It's one of the reasons that Temple City is in as great shape as it is. We have our proposed budget prepared. It's actually online. We put it up online today. We have a hard copy in City Hall. If you'd like to come look at it. It's very detailed. I would say right offhand it's probably 150 pages. So in order to make our budget process a little more palatable to you and the citizens, we have prepared this document called Budget in Brief, and I have included a copy for you, and this is also up on the website. So I encourage you to take a look at that when you have a couple minutes. I'm not going to go into too much, I'm not going to go into the details of it because a lot of the information I'm covering tonight is in this document. Okay, why strategies that Temple City has implemented to ensure a balanced budget. Number 1, zero-based budgeting. And what this means is that on an annual basis, staff and city manager, we basically tear apart the budget and ensure that the appropriations or the spending plan that we are proposing is realistic. A lot of agencies and over the years would just have a certain level of budget or level of spending, and they would just like increase it by a cost of living increase. You know, like they tell each department, okay, you have 3% more to spend this year on your operations. And so what happened is, I think a lot of agencies really didn't dig into really what they were spending their money on, and did they need to budget that much? And so with the zero-based budgeting process, you know, you ensure every year that you really need all those resources that you're proposing. And I got to tell you, Hosea holds it to the line for those department heads on what we're spending. Updated user fees. It's important in order for a city to stay financially healthy to ensure that they're recovering the cost of the services that they're providing, primarily in the area of recreation fees, planning and building fees, also facility fees. And so the city went through a user cost fee study approximately about a year ago, and looked at, you know, how much it costs to provide a service, and obviously it's a policy decision if you want to recoup 100% the cost of providing the service. And the city went through that process and did increase some fees recently. And again, I know it's a little bit harder on your pocketbook, but it does. It certainly is significant in a good budgeting process and ensures that the city does stay healthy. Comprehensive revenue estimates. I think this is key. One of the reasons the state is in such a mess, and they know it, is their revenue estimates are just not, they're smoke and mirrors, as everybody says. They know, they just, at the end of the budget process in Sacramento, they know that they have to get a budget passed by June 15th or June 30th, and they know that they have these, huge spending plans, and the way they do it at the 11th hour is they increase the revenue estimates. I mean, it's really, it's a legal budget. Is it comprehensive? Is it realistic? No, as we all are finding out. Again, as responsible for estimating revenues, I have to be realistic. I mean, you just can't, tell the departments if they have this money to spend if they really don't. And so I would not say that we're conservative, because it's not. It's important to be, if you're conservative and revenues continually come in